Another can of worms that's been opened from learning about other fatal flaws and errors that have been done by the government and the police, courts, prosecutors under the Constitution that are starting to be uncovered now that I'm learning more and more and finding more and more mistakes based on constitutional law that's still in effect and has certain principles which are very important still today, which end up kind of are there to prevent corruption, basically, corrupt practices, all of the values and basis that these founding principles and laws are in the Bill of Rights and the Claim of Right and the Magna Cartas and so forth, that's still in effect, are most definitely there to prevent corruption. And, now that we claim to have made progress. We're supposed to be. We're trying to prevent crime, prevent people breaking the law, corruption, being dishonest, stealing, violence, knife crimes. You would have thought that moral principles, values, honesty, integrity would be at its pinnacle in the Ministry of Justice. But as it turns out, this is not the case. And the case is that it's actually very, very corrupt. And many of these people don't even realise that because they're being schooled and taught and educated that it's perfectly okay to do it. It would be almost kind of like, when school teachers used to put a child over the knee and smack them at school, or with a ruler, or smack their hand with a ruler or something. It was regarded as normal, right? And they've lost sight of these founding principles. This is what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is talking about, and he's like, the whole Constitution's gone to pot in America. It's gone under the values, Biden's cheating in the elections and so forth. And this particular matter that I'm raising now, comes from the fact of this oath, the judge's oath. And this is a high-profile case of Julian Assange, where they come up with this deal to release him between the American government and the UK judiciary, and obviously between Assange as well. But it was in more recent months that they came up with this plea deal, although in law, on paper, really the extradition is absolutely and totally barred, to an extent that there shouldn't have even been an attempt for extradition. And also it took so long that it broke the Magna Carta, so really they should have let him go without a plea deal. And there's also a move that the Attorney General could have done, this special nolle prosequi, but the Attorney General seemed to be supporting the American government rather than upholding Assange's rights, which is ridiculous. But we don't have an Attorney General at the moment because she's lost her seat in Parliament because Parliament's been dissolved. And I don't know what's happening with this Trudy Warner case, which is all about oaths and jury's oaths, kind of that area of law as well. So with the Assange, the deal, you can't do deals, particularly with courts, and that's why it's in the oath, and it's called favours. They're called favours, right? You do something for me, I'll do something for you, or we'll do a trade or a negotiating, but negotiating not through legal proceedings, negotiations between the parties. Well, the parties can negotiate, that's for certain, because, before you go to court, you can say, a civil suit or a tort, right? Party A and Party B. Mr. Smith owes Mr. Johnson some money, or a couple are getting divorced, or whatever's happening. They can agree to do something without court action. But once you enter into court actions, the judge makes the oath of no deals and no favours. No favours for justice. Because when you enter justice, you're actually you aren't sorting it out between party A and party B with your own conscience anymore. You're entering a legal process that has to be properly preceded by and judged by law, the letter of the law, and based on evidence through court. And when you get a jury in on that, the jury has to look at the evidence. The jury can use their own conscience and opinion, but not through deals and negotiations with either party, because they are independent to either party and they are impartial to either party, except for the evidence and the law and rights and their own independent opinion. So the jury can enter no negotiations or deals with either party. There's loads of laws to stop them researching things and speaking to anyone. And the judge is meant to be impartial, right? Supposedly. But in criminal law, it's different to tort, because once you have the prosecutor or the police or acting on behalf of the public interest, a law of the nation has been broken and they're charging you, and it can be judged on supposedly only on the law of the land or through lawful due process, the jury, and by the evidence, right? Obviously, rights apply. They've got to recognise people's rights. And recognising people's rights is not a deal or a trade. That's law. Your rights are law that has to be applied and complied with into effect. This non-prosecutive thing that the Attorney General can do is they can determine if a case is special or particular under certain circumstances to discontinue, but that's usually based on a point of law or maybe on a right or on some defect in the evidence or proceedings or something along those lines, right? But for certain, the oath, and I've done this in another video, so I'm kind of extending, I'm taking this on to something else now from just the oath. So in England, the judge's oath definitely does include no favours, and that extends to quite a lot. A lot of the principles and basis in that oath, although the oath likely goes back well before 1689, but this Claim of Right Act, which I've talked about over and over again, but if you're watching this video, just like this video alone, I'll need to mention it briefly. A lot went on between Scotland and England, and you're looking at, persons in military positions, possibly even the sheriff, persons of rank in the hierarchy, using authority if they're also a justice of the peace, if they've got a commission of the peace, if they're a military commander or something like that, and you're looking at, not using military force and trying people that you've defeated when you capture them, and all this kind of thing, and giving them getting a fair trial still under law, in England or Scotland, not literally being massacred by military commanders who are, having mock proceedings or a posse going after them or whatever, and just lynching them without fair trial and so forth. So that's what the Claim of Right is all about, but also torture figured into it as well, like torturing information out of people or getting them to confess by torture or give information by torture, and then, or even, promising them a lower sentence if they confess, or if they give information. That's a deal for justice. Why it's illegal is what you're doing is you've got the law, the letter of the law, and you've got the evidence which the prosecutor or whoever's bringing against you. And rather than go through the lawful due process and having the evidence all heard fairly and a jury decide on it, or by applying law, what they're doing is that they're trying to get you to do a deal, or doing deals and negotiations is not law, is it? Because the law is applying legislation, or what does this evidence show or mean? Otherwise, it's purely a proceeding based on a handshake, a negotiation. the law's not meant to be negotiable or evidence negotiable. Well, it is, but through questioning the witnesses, through showing the evidence, through proving it in lawful due proceedings. And then after you have been found guilty or innocent, then you're supposed to be sentenced, right? So otherwise, what they're doing is they're it's sentencing with a deal. I've explained that there's multiple ways. The wanted post is a good model for it. Giving a reward for information. You can't have yourself being given reward, which ends up paying your fine because you confessed. That's kind of a little bit like what they did with Assange, really. But instead of you could have a wanted poster saying 50 gold pieces for Assange or whatever, or you could say if you give information on Assange, we'll release him. That's a favour for justice. Assange can't give information on himself in return for 50 gold coins. If his fine is going to be 50 gold coins, you can't say, we'll give a reward of one free prison release for anyone who gives evidence on Assange, including himself, because then if he gives evidence on himself, if the reward is instead of 50 gold coins a prison release, he's done a deal for justice, which evades the point of law. It evades the point in legislation proceedings and due process. So the claim of Right Scotland, it's all about oaths and these kind of tortures and military commanders acting as justices unfairly against conquered people and all that. That's what it's based around. Corruption, very kind of devious and nasty corrupt practices. So with that, this is when the video actually really starts this time, because I kind of went over some of that in the other video. But so the Crown Prosecution Service, they've got this page on assisting offenders. You can scroll down on it, but it tells you all about what assisting offenders is. And this is all about your informers, like in that song, Informer, that Snow artist, whatever he's called. He's got a song called Informer. In Point Break, in the movie Point Break with Keanu Reeves, Patrick Swayze, they've got the Keats, the undercover police guy, and all this, undercover cops or undercover people working for police and so forth. So assisting offenders is all about people helping the police or getting them to help them. Now the thing is, the law for assisting offenders, the Crown Prosecution Service was formed in 1986, right? And it happens to be, I don't think it was a fluke chance that when they formed this organisation, this is when they pulled the Tumultuous Petitioning Act as well. But also, so 1985-86, right? So the Crown Prosecution Service isn't that old, right? Now, I've just read up on what happened before then. The police were in charge of the final decision on who would be prosecuted and not, and they used solicitors, basically. They employed, the police just employed lawyers, prosecutors, right? And they did, from the late 1800s, they started to, they always had like an attorney general, but then they had these director of public prosecutions and, chancellor and attorney generals and these kind of like central figures who usually did cases on behalf of the government or the Lords or Parliament or whatever, right? But they started to kind of like, do a little bit of advising or acting on behalf of some cases for police chiefs or police forces and so forth, right? But we've got to get the time scale right here. So before the Crown Prosecution Service was formed, they had this Director of Public Prosecutions and Attorney General kind of higher up framework, but they were still sort of using lawyers, right? Solicitors. Now, when we go back to, we need to go back to 1967. 1967 is the other date when the Tumultuous Petitioning Act was modified, other than the Public Order Act, which I just said around the time when the Crown Prosecution Service was invented. Now, 1967, we get this Criminal Law Act, and we get this section called Assisting Offenders, right? This section is called Offences for Assisting Offenders, right? And it sets out that, effectively, to put it as simply as possible, although it's a little bit more complicated and technical, but just for easy listening, the principles in here are like, if any person, anyone, right, is pursuing apprehending criminals, and any other person obstructs them, right, or gets in their way, or helps the criminals, that's an offence, right? So that's the legal basis in 1967 in this Act. Now, funnily enough, in this Act, 1967, Queen Elizabeth pulls a lot of Magna Carta, which I've said is just ridiculous, because Parliament opens with the privileges of Magna Carta, all of the ancient privileges, through a speaker petition to the Chancellor and so forth. And they're using those rights and invoking them through that petition, which they can't do because they got repealed. So it's almost like Fawlty Towers, or Carry On Up the Courthouse or something. It's joke. So Parliament really isn't open legitimately. Parliament hasn't legitimately opened since 1967. There's got to be plenty of other things they've been doing wrong as well, but this is a big one, because that's the Lord's privileges from Magna Carta, and then you've got the Tumultuous Petitioning Act that they mess around with. But this is way before the Crown Prosecution Service are formed, so the police are still using like paid lawyers, basically, to do the prosecuting for them, right? Now, this assisting offenders, this is way before the CPS are invented, and the CPS have this entire... You see, the CPS is the Crown Prosecution Service is meant to be a proper organisation with all this policy, all these rules. Not all of them are set in law, but they're meant to reflect to the law. All these very, very intricate and supposedly honourable and, honest, professional procedures for prosecuting. And they can even assess prosecutions, and have a decision separate from the police, right? But they've got this assisting offenders section specialising in it, right? Now, really, the assisting offenders basis is what really it's extremely similar to when you draft a petition, writ, and you get people to sign it, and you bring this petition, because even in Thomas Erskine May, they talk about prosecuting a petition, not prosecuting against one, actually prosecuting a petition is bringing the action, to government. So part of the immunities that you're meant to get from the 1688 Bill of Rights are really effectively similar to this assisting offenders immunity, because otherwise someone's obstructing you pursue the petition, even if you're like the current cases with Trudy Warner and Roger Hallam and Extinction Rebellion. Their actions are meant to raise awareness and get support from the public, even if people don't agree with them, or sometimes even if they might be illegal, although it's meant to protect from at least the lower courts anyway, parliamentary privilege. But, let's pull it back to, let's bring it back onto this assisting offenders. But the basis behind the right to petition immunity is effectively extremely similar to this assisting offenders basis, although it comes from the Criminal Law Act 1967, right? But the Tumultuous Petitioning Act was mentioned in that, and it isn't mentioned in many acts, extremely rarely, so it's relevant to that act. So the CPS have got this entire section and policy based on taking on witnesses who might be criminals or who might have committed crimes, but they're taking them on as witnesses. They're going to help the police. They're going to help the prosecutor. But remember, you've got to remember that. Now, this is when it's important, because we've got 1967 here with this law for assisting offenders, where it makes it that if anyone stops you pursuing criminals or crime, they commit. And remember, you've got these common informers. You've got these common informers where, they might bring little private prosecutions about, people opening cinemas on Sundays or whatever. So really, if you got in the way of them, you'd be breaking the law. But they put an end to. You could receive like a little reward, or you if you prosecuted through common informers, you could you receive the reward for prosecuting them. For grassing them up and going to the court with a case. But that's another basis that's extremely similar to petitioning the House of Commons, but you're not a common informer anymore. If you're a House of Commons informer on a national matter of importance, it's not a little common crime. Common informer, Commons informer, House of Commons informer, same process, different jurisdiction, different importance in case, you have extremely petty crime or offences or extremely serious crimes or offences, from opening a cinema on a Sunday, common informer, to, bringing a case against a completely corrupt government or complaining through petition about a completely corrupt government for breaking subverting the limits of the realm. You got two ends of the spectrum. So if you ain't got, if you've got immunity for anyone stopping you or getting in your way for one, then surely you definitely got it for the other, or tenfold, So 1967, this really is the legal principle for these common informers. But the thing is, if you haven't got a proper Crown Prosecution Service, then, anyone can pursue criminals or pursue crime or try to apprehend criminals, right? Now, the thing is, at what point did they start doing deals with people, witnesses? Because the thing is, anyone can pursue crime or criminals and no one can get in their way if they want to, But this is the police taking them on to help them officially, right? So you're doing deals with the police or the police's solicitors who might bring charges against you. But they're not going to bring charges against you. You're going to help them bring charges against someone else, right? But the law also says that if someone is reported a crime, then they've got to be reported. Now, the judge is the one who's got this oath to no deals. So really, at that point, they could argue that the main argument for the authorities is this, and that is that if the police take on an informer and do a deal with them, they're not making a deal with the judge, because when you turn up at court, they're just bringing a case against something else, right? But the judge's oath is that there shall be no deals in law, really connected with the case brought before them, really. I think, or how can it be illegitimate, no deals with the court or judge, right? Now, the thing is, so let's go back a little bit further than 1967. When we start going back before 1967 and way back to the formation of the police force itself, we've talked about the formation of the Crown Prosecution Service. Now let's talk about the formation of the police force, the burning down of Parliament mysteriously with, the Robert Peel, the guy who invented the police force, but he's connected to Parliament being burned down and sending them to set fire to some, counting beads underneath, or whatever. It was an accident, yeah, right, 1939, 1830, is it 1839 or 1939? No, 1839. Or not, just a minute, 1900. No, Parliament burned in 1839. It's the 1800s, definitely. 1800s, right? So, they've got constables and they've got sheriffs, and they kind of have these trained bands or trained gangs, but it's all kind of like, anyone can get these. You or me could kind of pay someone to go get a criminal or go get some evidence for them or help them. It was more like a profession that anyone could pay someone to help them with, right? Pay someone like more like rookie police kind of sort of thing for hire. Bounty hunter, really. More like a bounty hunter type thing, right? They had. Or you could do it yourself, right? So a lot of people are bringing prosecutions themselves. It's down to them. If someone does a crime against you, you can go tell the sheriff or whatever. But a lot of people were, you see, with these hundreds, when someone reported a crime, right, to the public, everyone was told about it, and then everyone had to look out for the criminals, and they had to help, right? So it's like a village effort. They could even be fined if they failed to capture them, right? So you all actually, it's all like, specials. The police have voluntary police specials. So everyone really at some time or other, a little bit like jury service in a way now. People call it random for jury service, but they had permanent jurors at that time. So anyone could be called to have to do police work, if there was a criminal on the run, right? A little bit like, just happens to be someone in the area or whatever. Like, this is how they caught Guy Fawkes, So people are really engaged in catching criminals and prosecuting, I think this is probably tied into how the English etiquette developed, and be nice to each other, and you don't mess with people, or that they'll seriously use authority and power on you. And you're given authority and power in law, not only just for petitioning Parliament, but in the local area in crime. How people say hello to each other, and people used to have to make them be aware that they were on their private land. If you were on a landowner's land, you had to make them aware that you were there, shout and signal your presence and so forth. There's a lot of things tied into that. So someone did a video about it recently, but I forgot who it was now. Might have even been on Double Down News or something like that. The English chap. There's a lot more influence in the English politeness in the legal system, and not just fashion or whatever. So, basically, everyone's kind of helping each other. Everyone's helping catch a criminal. So if you think about it, right? If there's a criminal on the loose, right, and it's the requirement of all the village to catch them if they see them or know any information about them, right, then everyone is using this assisting offenders principle, right? Everyone, right? So everyone's got to help, right? Or give evidence. In fact, you've got to, right? So if there was like some drug dealers in like, in a hide or something or whatever, really, everyone, it would be everyone's legal requirement to capture them, find them, and bring them in. So, you don't have the police doing a deal with you to say, like, look, right, we'll do a deal, you've committed this crime, but, if you help us, get some serious evidence against these people, we'll let you off. Well, you'd have to help the police anyway, right? It was a requirement before hue and cry. So you couldn't really have this doing deals like, there was no deal. It's like, you'll help us catch these fucking criminals, or the village gets fined. It was illegal not to help them, right? So you didn't, there was no deals like, you will, everyone in the village has got to get these criminals. There's no deals done. Like, that's it. Someone's broke the law, and you got to bring them in, right? Obviously, you're covered by rights and immunities from that. So as we progress from that. And people are also bringing their own legal proceedings and getting a lawyer or whatever, not necessarily the sheriff or whatever, for their own private cases and so forth. So, but this is the thing. We'd had these courts of conscience, the 1688 Bill of Rights and Glorious Revolution, and the Act of Indemnity, which is important to know about the Act of Indemnity. It's got an effect or a significance on the 1688 Bill of Rights, right to petition, and the Act of Grace, where many people are pardoned, that reflects on it as well at the time, and we've all got all the dialogue for the proceedings in Parliament as well. So they have these courts of conscience, that people, should be judged on merit of, by rule of law, but also good conscience, good judgment by their peers, and they had like them in Bristol and London and all over. What happened to that, which was 1688. 1700, and then all through the 1700s, and then we get to the early 1800s. Then what happens, you see, after this Metropolitan Police and the burning of Parliament and the Metropolitan Police are formed, what happens is by the mid 1800s, right, 1850s, they're actually, 1 minute they want these courts of conscience after the Glorious Revolution and the Bill of Rights, courts of conscience and good juries. Well, when we get to the 1850s, just after Parliament's burned and after they've invented the proper Metropolitan Police force, professional force, they pull juries out of the magistrates' courts and start to not have juries in magistrates' court. You just get the judge. So you don't have a court of conscience in the magistrates' court level, only in the assizes or quarter sessions, which is the equivalent of the Crown Court, right? So pull the juries out, being judged by your equals, for smaller crimes. And so you've got the private lawyers, solicitors prosecuting. A citizen can get one, or the sheriff or constable, will get one. You've got the Attorney General and so forth, but they don't have a proper Crown Prosecution Service. And remember, we've still kind of got this thing tailing off then. As we enter the end of the 1800s into the early 1900s, we're kind of like, this kind of like public engagement in the prosecutions, helping, it is kind of fading, vanishing, right? And then you've got the police taking over, right? And these private lawyers, but people are still using private lawyers, and they've still got these common informers, and you're still petitioning the government and all this, right? So, but you've still got this claim of right and Bill of Rights and the Magna Carta and so forth. But the police are doing a lot of the police really aren't probably going to like that, because rights and immunities and so forth. It's not good when the police. The police aren't supposed to really get involved in matters to Parliament. It's between you're bringing the case, not the police, right? You've got a case to a higher jurisdiction. It's your case, right? So it's interesting, this time between the sort of the mid 1800s, and then you've got 1967, 1850, 1860, then 1850, 1860, then 1950, 1960. It's only 100 years, right? Then you've got this act here that says, no one can get in your way. It's an offence. It's a criminal offence to get in your way. Now, if you rewind back, you were committing the offence if you didn't go after them. Never mind it being an offence if someone blocks you or gets in your way or tries to obstruct you. You got to. So under that claim of right, this is an important insight. Under that claim of right, in the Bill of Rights, you couldn't really have deals, because there was no deals. We catch criminals. Everyone catches criminals when they're on the loose. That's what we do, right? Everyone's doing it. We're all doing it. Or, you will, right? You deal for it. You're doing it. So that's where I am with it. So when the public stop being required to do this hue and cry, help out, and the police kind of take over duties, 1850s, 60s, 70s, and then up to this 1967, you've got this period where the public are just, getting on with their own jobs. So that's when the police are probably going to want to try and get people to help them or do deals. But most people report crimes anyway, right? Most people want to report a crime if it's a crime, right? But we're talking about being a witness, becoming a witness, or appearing in court as well, right? So it's really the police force who are at question under this. Now, remember, the judge's oath can do no favours, right? So really, the police, it's not a tort. It's not like a civil matter between two parties, or are you going to sue me for defamation? It's up to me, well, they try and sort it out of court. If they can't sort it out of court, they go to court. But with criminal law, it's different. If you've broken the law, you've broken the law. If there's evidence against you, there's evidence against you, right? So the police aren't supposed to do deals, supposedly, right? It's not meant to be deal making and bargaining. So that's when we get into this strange territory. Now, the Criminal Law Act 1967 makes it an offence for anyone to get in anyone else's way, right? If they're breaking the law, right? Sorry, if they're pursuing someone who's breaking the law. But this judge's oath thing is that it holds all the way through this whole thing, right? Now, what I've realised is from these deals that have been done with like Assange, these deals that have been done with Assange and others, right? The modern CPS that's got this whole assisting offenders thing, right? I realise that the judges are breaking their oath with the Assange thing, and I think in the police aren't meant to hold common pleas, right? The police, because of that claim of right, they're not meant to. Everyone's meant to have a fair trial by a court of record or jury, right? The police can't hold common plea or get you to confess on yourself with doing deals, and for sure, a reduced penalty charge is a deal. Definitely a deal. And they only started doing these mass amounts of fines, under John Major, really, when they started getting the speed, because they weren't able to do mass fines without the speed cameras and rake the charges in. They weren't able to rake all these charges in without all the machinery and tech. So they've really created themselves, even though they've made enactments and laws and procedures. What they've done wrong is they have deviated from the underlying values and framework set out in the statute law, which makes a lot of this thing corrupt. It's corrupt, it's dodgy, it's shady, it's not proper and right, and so forth. They're doing deals. So, I mean, is it illegal for the Crown Prosecutor? I'm pretty sure that in criminal law, not in civil law, in criminal law, crimes against the state or king, which is an offence in criminal law, I don't think that you can do deals. Because ultimately the judge's oath to make judgment on a case that is brought into the court without any favours done in exchange for justice, there are favours done in exchange for justice in the case between the investigating officer and the witnesses, or the prosecutor and the witnesses, and now even defendants like Assange and so forth. And this is what the CPS have based their whole principle on it, right? No one's saying that you shouldn't have immunity, but the thing is, when all these ancient rights and privileges were set out, right, like I said, if you're pursuing a criminal and acting effectively as a citizen, citizen's arrest, a common citizen who's enforcing the law, you have and should have the right to, pursue the criminal, and no one get in your way. And obviously, without a police force, it's everyone's legal obligation to do that without any deals. I don't. The oath of the police officer, it's. The police aren't the court. The court's meant to be impartial and be acting on the evidence presented in the law. But when the case that turns up at court is a case that is based on an agreement and deal or negotiations, it wasn't the sheriff who puts the wanted posters up and offers the rewards in exchange for information and evidence, which ends up being used for prosecution. So the case itself surely doesn't conform to the underlying law. You know, you're not exactly doing a deal with the judge, but in the Assange case, he was. I think in the Assange case, they were doing deals. Well, at the end of the day, the judge is the deal sealer. So if you've got a federal attorney, if you've got, like, you know, the Attorney General in America or the American prosecutors, and they're doing a deal with Julian Assange for justice, and the judge, you know, is informed about this, and they're even recommending or telling him, because how does the judge know what sentence is going to be? How does the judge on the island Assange went to know that Assange has served 5 years, and because he served that, you know, they're going to say it's all done with? Well, he's the one who makes the order based on what? Well, based on a deal. So he's coming out with a favour sentence with an agreement. It's not justice based on evidence or law. It's justice based on a negotiation, and the conscience of the defendant has been asked or manipulated to make a plea based on a deal. I was, you know, asked to change my plea. They can't get you to change your plea. It's actually illegal because your plea is your own conscience and whether or not you think you're guilty or not. In the American oath of the judge, it clearly states that, you know, nothing personal between any of the other parties, between the judge and every other parties, nothing personal, right? And complete impartiality. You know, this is trying to persuade or affect the conscience of the defendant. Obviously, when they're giving evidence and they're asked a question, you know, they're expected to answer that question. But that's got nothing to do with entering their plea and so forth, which is, you know, it's the same as getting into the jury's free conscience, really. Effectively, the conscience of the jury as an independent entity who is impartial to either party, right, can judge on its own opinion, but their own opinion is not to be negotiated other than by the evidence or on point of law, right? And that's the same as the conscience and plea. Basically, the plea of the defendant it is meant to be as sacred and holy as the verdict of the jurors, you know, and that's why it's impartiality to them, and why individuals, persons with a consciousness, a conscience, you know. So I think it gradually got corrupted. You got these things happening, you know, like the formation of the police force, and then ditching hue and cry, and then, you know, then they're bringing in the Crown Prosecution Service, and then, you know, but Queen Elizabeth, she ditched half of Magna Carta in this 1967, which is dumping some of the rights of the barons. When then they continue to open Parliament with it in the Speaker's petition, all of the ancient rights and privileges that have ever been. You know, but what you just repealed half of them, but you're still pretending that you open Parliament with them. So it's fatal error. It's like a fatal error and flaw, because no one's criticising it. They just go to uni, learn what you learn, do what you're told, you know, go home. So this is it, you know. So I'm actually now going to have to challenge this whole assisting offenders basis, because I think that although the law says that if any person is pursuing a criminal, it's an offence for anyone to get in their way, right, or help the criminal, right? But that's a law for pursuing criminals, right? It was a requirement for everyone to do that under hue and cry, right? You know, if you or me want, you know, see someone robbing a shop, we can, you know, do something about it, right? Under that law. That's not really. That's something of itself, right? Than the police doing their job to get criminals and going around questioning people, witnesses, you know, answering questions or seeing if anyone will testify in court. But if another person has broken the law, but is connected to the criminals and might be able to help them, this is when they're saying, "Oh well, we'll if you help us, we'll reduce your penalty, or we'll stop prosecuting you, or whatever." What that's doing is getting people who are criminals to help them in exchange for justice. So it is favour for justice, right? But it might be through the police or prosecutor. But again, the judge is the one who seals the deal and makes the order based on it all. He's sealing deals that have been done by parties who are doing deals in exchange for justice. So I can't see it only applying to him sat there and, a defendant saying, "Oh, I'll do a deal with you," or "Do me a favour," or the prosecutor saying, "Oh, I'll do a deal or do a favour." I think prosecutors and judges do each other favours all the time, unfortunately, particularly when they've got an office in the building. That's another investigation of its own. So this, under the Crown prosecution, the modern model, they've got this kind of weird, arcane, clerical kind of like terminology, this kind of like, Grima Wormtongue sort of, sinister kind of robed, dark riders, kind of, like Lord of the Rings, this sort of style, dark, sinister terms like, cleansing. The process of admitting other criminality, often called cleansing, should be part of the debriefing process carried out by the investigators in the process of obtaining evidence of the potential assisting offender. So what we find here is highlighted in yellow and orange is all the this is, I wanted to know, I'd heard of it, but I wanted to find out more about it. What actually is it? Well, so cleansing the offender. When I first read it, I was like, this is weird. Is it some kind of weird psychological, I don't know, like treatment or something? I don't know, like cleansing the offender. They ain't going to the washroom with a bucket of water chucked over them. So what it is, it's almost like confessions, when you go into, like into a church and you've got confessions, in a way, it's all tied into that really, like when you go to confessions, with a priest, but, you got the Bible in there. But this cleansing isn't actually required by law. It doesn't have a legal basis. It is a practice they've developed. The modern CPS have developed these techniques, developed the practices, made into an art form, even though it's not established in law, right? They found that their own success rate and so forth in court depends on, if these offenders actually are made to confess any crimes or offences that they may have committed before they are taken on as a witness and give evidence and help the police, right? And some of these people under this can be granted immunities. How can they be granted immunities? Well, there is a legal basis under that assisting offenders law that if they're helping apparent criminals, no one can obstruct them or get in their way, right? It doesn't necessarily say they can't be prosecuted. It says no one can get in their way. Now, if that means that they can't be prosecuted and is like immunity, then, but the chief crown prosecutor or director of prosecutions, can authorize these immunities, but there are different levels. But these levels are determined by them, not really by law, what they choose. But because the prosecutors are a rank and file unit with people in charge, like Attorney General and so forth, the certain persons have to authorise it only because they're in charge, on no other basis than that. They have to give permission, right? So the Attorney General can give full immunity. All that means is that they'll make an agreement not to prosecute you. It's just like you say, if someone headbutts you, it's like you make an agreement that you won't report them to the police, basically. that's up to your individual conscience. But because the police or the Crown prosecutors have got an entire organisation under rank and file and, using law and very serious, it's all got to be approved and approved and authorised by your superiors, basically, nothing more than that. This organisation with many, many members, many, many prosecutors, many, many lawyers working with the police, they'll do a deal with you. They will come to an agreement with you that they won't prosecute you, but they'll just have to ask their boss if that's okay, right? Make sure it's all official. That's effectively it, and then they'll not prosecute you. I don't know how that works in law if someone's committed a crime when we got reported, but you got to report it. But now, does the assisting offenders law, because they might give evidence, is giving evidence helping catch another criminal, a more serious criminal? And this is when really this all plugs into the right to petition, because if you are the ones writing a writ of oath of petition to the Parliament, bringing a case with those oaths of those subscribed, you're the ones trying a case against the government. You're pursuing potential wrongdoers. Do you have the immunity of the right to petition, the 1688 Bill of Rights right to petition? All prosecutions are illegal and should not be imprisoned. Is that the same as the assisting offenders in the criminal law Act 1967, where if anyone gets in your way or tries to stop you, then they are committing an offence, right? Which could include bringing a prosecution against you, really, if it's going to stop you from doing the crime, right? That's effectively where I am with it. It doesn't say that explicitly, but it doesn't say that all prosecutions are illegal against you. It says that no one can stop you or get in your way. If they defeat you by another legal challenge and you will never end up finishing your crime, they've stopped you from doing it. If it takes all your money from you or puts you in prison and stops you pursuing it, then you can explore that basis to the effect that they are preventing you from pursuing a criminal if they put you in prison and you were pursuing that criminal. So it doesn't explicitly say all prosecutions against you are illegal, but there is a shared basis. But let's get nothing misconstrued. That assisting offenders law itself, remember, we never needed it because it was a requirement to pursue criminals, not for a deal. You had to do it. You didn't make a deal for it. And then later on, by 1967, we find that they make this law where, anyone pursuing a criminal, no one can obstruct them. But that's actually got nothing to do with making a deal. That's got absolutely nothing to do with making a deal with the police, because anyone can pursue a criminal and no one be allowed to obstruct them without any police being there. And in fact, you can catch them and hand them into the police. And you've already done it. I mean, you might have had to, maybe you might have had to exceed the speed limit to catch them, or break a window through, or something like that. And maybe the police might say, well, but there's legislation for all those things, reasonable force. But that's reasonable, They use this principle of reasoning. They can reason it in or reason it out. But with the right to petition, all prosecutions are illegal. You don't reason it in or out. Either you're doing a petition to the government, or you aren't. This is it. At least for the civil courts jurisdiction, we've got the Tumultuous Petitioning Act and so forth. So I think that Elizabeth Windsor made not only this big boo-boo by repealing a lot of Magna Carta in 1967, I think later on the police and the Crown prosecutors have got above themselves, and they've started dabbling in deal-making with witnesses in order to get them to help them. And they've started entering into deals for justice. And even though it's not directly with the judge is sealing the deal off. With the Assange case, it definitely was with the judge. I think the judge was an intricate part of the whole deal and the knowledge and awareness of it and the planning of it. And it was a setup. So and if you think about it, what's happening is these police and Crown prosecutors, I'm not saying they use assisting offenders that often, because it's rarely used except in exceptional circumstances. They've got it, they have it, then they do use it. But the irony is that some people are getting full immunity authorised in exceptional circumstances, yet that law which supports it isn't really as protective as the right to petition when you're bringing a case to Parliament, and people aren't getting that right acknowledged or recognised, not properly through the overriding objectives. They're having to kind of argue a case and put a defence in, and then you get into the old Hanningfield case, and the rest of it to do with this Trudy Warner case and Roger Hallam and so forth. Rights are meant to be recognised under overriding objectives, or they're meant to be recognised by each and every party, like the jury. It falls under the law, but it's a legal requirement. You've got this legal proceedings. The jury oath is by the evidence or by the law. Well, you've got to recognise the law. The thing is that the jurors all knew the law, because they were required to know all the law, at least up till 1800, until they were removed from the magistrates' court. They were required to know all the laws and rights of the realm. So if someone came in with a petition, the jurors would be like, it's a petition, right? Now, the police and CPS aren't recognising it when it's required in their oath, really, as well. And it doesn't matter what the charge is or what case it is or what act they're bringing the law under, because the rights aren't in an act. Well, they are. They're in the criminal procedure rules, which is an act, and that applies to every case brought. Okay? So it's not something that is going to necessarily have to pop up in the barrister or solicitor's casework, or in the prosecutor's casework. It's in the overriding objectives. That means that it applies at all times in all proceedings, that if there are any rights which are apparent or known of, recognisable, everyone has to acknowledge them, right? And they're not doing. Because everyone knows that Roger Hallam and, Trudy Warner are doing political campaign remonstrations, which, like under the 1661 Tumultuous Petitioning Act, consenting to them. They know it's to Parliament, and they know it's a case on behalf of Extinction Rebellion, and they know they've got a website, aims and goals, and everyone's consenting to it, and supporting it, and that's it. Either you are or you aren't. It's obvious, and then they're not acknowledging it on paper, that they're kind of pretending to ignore it, and they're not applying it. It applies like parliamentary privilege. It's like, if you cut your hand, then you get a plaster from the first aid cabinet. That is, that doesn't depend. It's got nothing to do with the case presented by the prosecution or the paperwork put on the table by the defence barrister or solicitor. The first aid box is on the wall, just like all the rights and privileges are in the overriding objectives. When people see them, how can they not see them? You get the Transport for London are bringing an injunction against Insulate Britain, but on paper it doesn't say Insulate Britain. It doesn't mention any political campaign or cause. It says unknown persons. They're trying to blanket, bluff it, ignore it, pretend it's not there when it is, and that's the problem. There's some very strong connections to the Lord Hanningfield case. That can't be plea based, because that means that depends on what he pleads and whether he can have his political privileges or not of Parliament. You can't have political privileges of Parliament depending on, if you decide what to plead. And if the prosecutor happens to go along a certain line of questioning, because that's not a right. That's chance. It's like a dice throw, and that means the prosecutor can decide whether your rights might apply or not, depending on what their line of inquiry is. when it doesn't matter what their line of inquiry is. All you need is, if they know, or it's clearly obvious that someone is, engaged in a petitioning campaign, that prosecutor has recognised the right, and if he doesn't, call it out, he won't be able to, he shouldn't prosecute, or they shouldn't be. This is what the petitions committee is meant to be for, and Parliament, it's a different jurisdiction. But then again, Lord Hangfield, Magna Carta was supposed to apply. It wasn't repealed. So that's going a little bit off track, a bit more complicated. Yeah, I think that these whole deals, these prosecutor deals, I think that they're in breach of this favours for justice principle from 1689 in the claim of right. And you wouldn't actually have been able to do it up until really the formation of the police force, because everyone had to catch criminals. There were no deals. You had to do it. So you can't really make a deal with them to do it. So it's definitely something that's arisen since the police force really was formed. And if you think of it, 1839 or whatever, the Met Police, that's, 1688, 89, 1600s, 1718, it's a lot older and more well established. So they're not checking what they're doing. And you can't override or change those rights. So I suppose Elizabeth has tried, because she tried to repeal half the Magna Carta, but they carried on opening Parliament with it, and with those rights that they'd repealed, which is it's like the Emperor's new clothes. Literally, is the Emperor's new clothes. You could, if you wanted to get really serious, like Robert F. Kennedy's on the brink of seriousness. Well, Putin is, because he's on the brink of World War III. You could claim that nothing Parliament has done since 1967 is valid. You could claim that nothing done by Parliament since 1967 has legal effect, if you wanted to really take them to town, and that all these new modern laws are tosh. Speed limiters on vehicles, or smoking indoors, or all this. You could say since 1967 this is valid. Judgments against the Great Charter shall be void. But really, they haven't. I don't think they have really repealed those Magna Carta clauses, have they? So that's the real thing. The thing is that they haven't. It says judgments against the Great Charter shall be void. So what the truth of it is, logically, is that the proceedings of Parliament likely are valid because they are using the rights and they weren't really repealed, which puts a lot of cases into question, like Lord Hangfield and others that would have otherwise relied on Magna Carta and the rights that are repealed. Then it's not quite as serious as everything that's Parliament's done being invalid, at least only some things that are invalid that have been done against the Great Charter. But even the Great Charter clauses that haven't been repealed, like the Liberty of London, Tony Blair, with his, Lincoln's Inn, I'm a qualified solicitor now, going to a couple of courtrooms and come out with a couple of verdicts. I'm doing it. He's running, he's passing. I'm Tony Blair. Now I'm the Prime Minister. There's history for you. I'm just making history and I'm writing it off. The congestion charge, I'm making history, criminal history, the illegal congestion charge, Sheriff of Nottingham, fines and fees, this is it. But this is what you get with these, Oxford graduates, like a little wind-up, like a pull-back toy car. Pull it back and let go and then watch it just shoot forward and then crash into the wall. It's like look, Tony Blair, put him on the floor and pull him backwards. He's in Oxford now, Lincoln's Inn, and let go of it. Whoosh! Wow, look at Tony go. Boom! It's going like a rocket, I'm doing employment law. Woo! Case 1, case 2, case 3, case 4, case 4, case 5. Then he's met his wife. Now it's bumpy like a pinball machine. Like Boris Johnson going round COVID parties. Hi, I'm Tony Blair, like the New Statesman. Bing, 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 like racking up score. How many crimes has he committed? War crimes. Bing, 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 bing. And then, there's all the congestion charge in London, against the Great Charter. Bing, 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 bing. It's like, what's Tony's score? George Dawes, show us the scores. Who's racked up the most crimes? Boris? Or is it Tony? He's a success. Even though, we're putting these speed limiters on these cars now. Not on Tony's. Boom, pulled it back and it reached 100 mile an hour and then crashed into a wall. This is it. So, yeah, these favours are illegal. It's actually the police, so it all seems to revolve around the police, this formation of the police force. We were supposed to have courts of conscience. We were supposed to have no dirty deals for justice. And then we end up with no courts of conscience, loads of dirty deals for justice. And, look at Julian Assange. He was clearly barred from extradition. Yeah, he had to go in prison for 5 years. And then, Trudy Warner is getting done for holding a sign up outside a court, which, the only reason she was outside the courts was because they were being charged illegally by the CPS against their protected parliament privileges and the oath of their parliament grievances. And, even though all of the jurors are meant to know all of the rights and privileges anyway, although we don't have permanent juries anymore, they're just like temporary ones plucked out at random. So a lot of these things need resolving, but I don't know what case I can bring this under because, I suppose that I have raised the oaths matter. I've raised the oaths matter with the Julian Assange case, but it applies extensively. It applies, all over the justice system, into this Crown Prosecution Service. In the CPS, they're meant to loosely base all their processes on law, but it's not legislation. These are just like the company rules, their company policies, company procedures. A lot of this isn't necessarily law. All this cleansing and so forth, not required by law. They need to cleanse themselves. This is the thing with the Crown Prosecution Service. The Crown Prosecution Service need to cleanse themselves, as do the justices. This is what we need. And unfortunately, we're not getting it. This is why we need some of these lawyers like this, Claire Montgomery, and some of the others, to cleanse these people. This is what Joe Markham, Good Law Project and so forth. They're meant to be holding these people to account. But, it's money, funding with these people. Where's the pro bono? Where is the pro bono? Some of these cases are so big that nobody should be expected to pay for it, like the YouTube challenge, Public Meeting Act violations of YouTube. No one should be able to have to put the money up for that. It's crimes against the people. It's in the public interest. A lot of these volunteers who work for pro bono are from chambers that may have been possibly dabbling in or agreeing to violating some of these things. So it's a mess. And we don't seem to be able to get any help if the only people who can help us are splashed in mud. They're meant to do pro bono as good deeds like community service. So, maybe if they ever get into trouble, they can argue that they've done, 100 hours of pro bono or whatever, so it gets them off. That's sentencing though, that's after justice, after verdict. So, there are a lot of issues covered in this, and I've done writing, but it's better to speak because I can cover more, having to write it all out and then kind of like get a dictionary out and try and make it sound like I've just walked out of university or something by adding some more words in like Russell Brand and then make it sound really, really intelligent, but it's basic principle. It's knowing what the basic principles are and seeing that they're being violated, and trying to find out when they started being violated and how and what happened over time, and how people didn't really realise or pick up on it, because they didn't notice as it changed. And a lot of these things, you can't just have Rishi Sunak pulling a new act out of his back pocket to make it all right, because a lot of these foundational laws are very important principles that hold up the integrity of the entire legal system, you know?